Yo, what is up everybody, it's Tuna. Today's video I wanted to showcase a build that I've been playing for the last few days. It's something that I've really enjoyed and I've also played last season. However, I think now is the right time to sort of showcase it to you guys because I think league mechanic and everything that it sort of, that it presents to us this league, and this build is just perfect to take that on. As you'll see here in the video, I am in full MF gear, pretty much very cheap setup. I'm able to take on full juiced league mechanic maps with, like as much wisp as possible. And yeah, basically just melt through the whole map, be able to get as much loot as possible, which has been kind of a challenge to find, the correct build that is able to do that without actually needing the most insane setup. However, I think this is a great build for that. And of course it has some cons and some pros, but we'll just go through that as we speak about the build and stuff like that. But in general, let me just start off with saying this is strictly a mapping build. It is not going to be doing any content outside of mapping, as you are 100% entirely dependent on your explosions to deal your damage. You will not deal any single target whatsoever. I know you're seeing Righteous Fire on the screen. However, Righteous Fire only serves as a purpose to ignite or basically start the chain, which essentially I will talk about a little later. But all it does is it deals enough damage to kill white monsters in your maps. And as soon as those white monsters explode, they will basically reflect ignites back onto your character. However, I just won't go too far into the mechanics of it just yet, and I will just sort of, let the footage speak for itself. So how does the build work? Since we're playing the Chieftain, we have access to the Hinocore's Death Fury Ascendancy Notable, which essentially is going to give us a 5% chance to explode, dealing 500% of the enemy's life as fire damage. So essentially, what we want to do is we want to get basically 100% ignite chance so that this explosion has, 100% chance to ignite. And then thanks to this and the fact that this league we have access to the Primeless Ascendancy, and through the Primeless Ascendancy we're able to stack an additional 3% chance to explode for 500% of their life. And on top of that, we also have that which was taken, which is a new unique jewel, which is sort of like a charm, however fits in a jewel socket. That is limited to 1. However, with that, we are able to get an additional 1%, which in total gets us up to 9% chance to explode enemies for 500% of their life. What this does is it really increases the sort of consistency of our explosions, and it makes it much, much easier to clear these maps and, have like a better time, as you don't have these sort of moments of patchiness where you're not exploding things, therefore you're not igniting yourself. But most importantly, how do you ignite yourself? Well, you do so thanks to the Fulcrum. The Fulcrum is one of those items that I think is, amazing, right? It's a perfect item in Path of Exile because it does something very unique that no other item does. And that is, aside for all of the stats that it gives you, is elemental ailments you inflict are reflected to you. And you might think, oh, that's a downside, right? But we're able to leverage that downside as a positive, thanks to some other crazy Path of Exile things. But essentially, you do not worry about any of the rolls on this item. You can just grab any Fulcrum without having to worry about the rolls, as they will not be, benefiting us in any way. How are we actually dealing with the ailment that we're reflecting? Because, we're dealing an ignite that is 500% of a monster life back onto ourselves. Well, again, the Chieftain provides us with the Salio's Cleansing Water. Salio's Cleansing Water, as well as giving us the benefit of being able to stack fire resistance to basically cap our resistances. It also gives us the line unaffected by ignite. And unaffected, unlike, being immune, means that we are still ignited. However, it does nothing to our character. And we're able to leverage this in a way where we are igniting ourselves. And because we are igniting ourselves, we are essentially the catalyst for a huge ignite. So we're basically carrying a massive ignite with ourselves around. And the way that we can actually deal damage thanks to this is because there's a very cool mechanic in Path of Exile where if you're ignited yourself and you have a source of proliferation, aka Fan the Flames, ignites you inflict a spread to other enemies within a radius of 1.5. We are able to actually proliferate this ignite to all enemies within a radius of 1.5 meters, which is quite small radius. However, this is actually scalable thanks to area of effect, and therefore we will stack additional area of effect through medium clusters like Assert Dominance, as well as Towering Threat, and we'll get 2 of those. However, we will also be getting Amplify here for an additional 10%, and a little bit here as well. That all sort of comes together as, you know, this invisible RF that is dealing millions of damage, because it's essentially like if you're actually able to explode a rare and that rare is, you know, that explosion hits another enemy, what happens is that the ignite is then reflected back onto you. Because rares have, you know, crazy amounts of HP, you're going to be getting an insane amount of base damage, which is then scaled up by all of your increases, your dot multi, and that kind of stuff. So in essence, what happens is that you will be getting an ignite onto yourself that deals up to damage cap, which is, you know, upwards of 32 million. I don't know the exact value, but yeah. So you think that, you know, 32 million in this league is actually not that much because monsters have insane damage reduction. The way that dots actually work is they are capped at 32 million regardless of how much damage reduction the monster has. So if a monster is actually reducing damage by 90%, you can still deal up to 32 million. All right, so now that we know the basics of how the build works, I want to explain some of the defensive mechanics, how we're actually able to stand around that are these very juiced maps that I'm running. And that is, you know, primarily thanks to the Defiance of Destiny. And the way this works is it would similarly work to something like the Blood Notch Immutable Forces combo, but it's much more powerful than that because it has a unique mechanic in that it gives you 40% of missing life or being hit by an enemy. So every time you get hit by an enemy before the attack actually registers, 40% of that life is basically gained, which is it's a cool mechanic because we're never actually able to gain life before an attack. This is the first time that this has been sort of introduced into Path of Exile, and it's also part of why it's so powerful. But we leverage the power of this item by using Petrified Blood. As you can see, I am actually at 50% life, so I count as low life right now. The way that I achieve that is through the use of the Petrified Blood Gem. Essentially what that does is it also staggers 40% of the damage that I take over 4 seconds, over a recent duration. Essentially what that does is, you know, not only does it take me to 50% HP, which means that I will be gaining an extra 40%, you know, of that missing HP before I get hit, every time I get hit. But on top of that, it also means that I am also staggering 40% of that damage, which essentially allows me to, you know, take that damage over time and then recoup it or regain it every time I get hit. And on top of that, I do also anoint Infused Flesh, which makes 18% of damage taken recouped as life. So essentially, we're able to mitigate a little bit of that Petrified Blood loss by also on top of that getting Infused Flesh. And then our weakness would actually be, you know, damage over time. And we are RF, of course, and so we're having to mitigate some of that by getting 1 life regen per 1% uncapped fire resistance, and we have, you know, up to 255% uncapped. But yeah, so we're mitigating the loss of Righteous Fire, but we're also using, you know, Summon Holy Relic on cast with damage taken, which is giving us an additional 155 life regenerated, as well as Vitality, which is giving us another 193. So everything is like sort of scaled up, and we're able to sort of regen, stuff like that. But we are still in danger of bleeds. So for bleeds, we need to have a life flask, which is going to be giving us bleed immunity when we press it. But we can also roll a more recovery rate when used on low life, which is really nice because we're always on low life. So when you press it, you're actually getting a ton of life to recover. So that's basically like a panic button for when you get bled, and also in general, you know, to recover life if you are getting a little bit dangerously low. Additionally, for our you know, damage reduction, we are getting endurance charges on hit, and there's 2 ways to do this. Either you get it through that which was taken, the jewel. As you can see, I have, you know, 27% chance to get an endurance charge when you are hit. Otherwise, you would have to get a charm, which gives you resistance. It says chaos resistance per endurance charge, and you know, 1% chance to explode for 500% of life. You would put that there, and then you would replace one of these jewels that I have here. As you can see, that this one gives me chaos resistance. You would replace one of these for a small cluster jewel that gives you enduring composure. So that's going to be endurance charges when you're hit. That's going to give you the endurance charges that you need, you know, to mitigate damage. We have 5 endurance charges, so that's plenty physical damage reduction. However, we also do have a little bit of armor. You know, it's 10k. It's not much, but it actually is quite a bit considering the fact that we are actually shifting a lot of the physical damage we take to fire damage. And, you know, we do that by getting 40% here on the body armor, as well as, you know, getting 8% as a suffix here. We would ideally get another 7% as fire here. However, I do have as lightning. But yeah, in combination with, you know, the chest as well as the helmet as well as potentially also the Watcher's Eye, which I really recommend getting a 1-stat physical damage taken from hits, taken as fire. So yeah, you would get up to, 60%, 40, and then we get 80, so it's a 50, yeah, about like 65% or like something like that taken as fire, depending on your rolls, right, of course, because yeah, you're gonna have to roll that. So that's pretty good amount of damage that you are actually taking. So the rest is then mitigated through armor as well as damage reduction. Additionally, I am also taking this armor mastery. So this armor mastery is going to allow our armor to also help us mitigate our chaos damage hits. Chaos damage is going to be one of those things that actually hurts us the most. So we want to mitigate as much of that as possible. So it is actually worth going for this node here, getting reduced extra damage for critical strikes, as well as getting the mastery here for 10% of armor applies to chaos damage. And of course, because critical strikes are really scary, especially when you're running Wandering Path builds, you also want to grab this mastery here for an extra 30%. We are reducing critical strikes, by 60%. However, 40% of those of the damage is still going to go through, and it's still going to be scary. But be mindful of that, right? So that essentially is going to sum up the sort of damage reductions that we have on this character. But additionally to everything, we of course are a chieftain, so we're pumping up our maximum fire resistance, which you can also get through charms, as well as prismatic skin and things like barbarism and that kind of stuff. Yeah, I also like to get 1% on the body armor because it's relatively accessible here, and you don't actually need any damage on the body armor. Righteous Fire no longer actually scales with levels, so you're just basically going for 1% on the armor, and that gets me up to 89% total maximum fire resistance. Of course, it doesn't necessarily have to be this high. Of course, you can go to 85% as well, and you'll still be insanely tanky. But if you want to min-max this build and get that up to 90%, that is possible by getting an additional 1% on these, because these roll up to 2%. And of course, the way we achieve that is, by getting a Purity of Fire here that gives us 5% additional maximum fire resistance. And of course, that's scaled up by the fact that we have a +2 aura implicit on our Sardimas. Yeah, so that gets us a ton of maximum fire resistance. That takes us from 84 all the way to 89. That pretty much sums up the defenses on this character, in combination with Defiance of Destiny, with our maximum fire resistance, our recoup, all of that stuff. We actually end up being pretty damn tanky. But just to make sure that everything is going well for us in maps, we're getting a little bit of block. We have 20% on the staff, so we end up with about 32% block in total, I believe. You'll have to just believe me on that one, but yeah, we get up to about 30% block, and then we recover 2% of life when we block. That's just going to give us a little bit of extra buffer. Make sure that we're not actually, that we are regenerating our life rather than basically just being trickled down as monsters are slamming us in maps. For our Pantheons, we need to have Soul of Brine King, and this needs to have Capture Mirrorveil the Return. It's really important that you actually upgrade this one, and you can also upgrade Capture Blood Progenitor. However, I would not recommend actually capturing Nassar, Linus of the Seas, as you might actually want to end up playing this build as a self-chill build, as it is very easy to actually self-chill on this character. And all you would have to do is to actually swap out this Death Rush for the Winter Weave, and also Oriath's End here as well. However, if you do that, you'll have to find a way to mitigate bleeds and stuff like that, so you might have to consider swapping out your Taste of Blood, your Taste of Hate. So essentially, that is one for you guys to figure out. Maybe I'll put out other versions of this build in the future if you're wondering, what that would look like. So to deal with attributes on this build, I'm using an Elegant Hubris that is commemorated by Caspiro. What it's going to provide me with is Supreme Ostentation, which essentially is a keystone that makes me gain no inherent bonuses from attributes, but it also makes me ignore attribute requirements. So that's really, really nice, because then we don't have to worry about the dexterity that we need for our gems and all that kind of stuff. But in addition to that, we're also able to get two pretty insanely big bonuses here. The bonuses I'm getting are, chaos resistance, as well as % chance to avoid being shocked. Because we have no way to actually gain ailment immunity on this build, because if we actually wanted to get ailment immunity, that would mean that we are not actually able to ignite ourselves. It's important to get shock avoidance somehow, because shock makes us take a ton more damage, and we do not want that, right? So I get 80% here from this node, and you can search for that in the Path of Building, of course. And the second thing that I do get to cap out my shock avoidance is just a jewel. You're going to want to look for one with, life and avoid being shocked, or ideally, actually, Corrupted Blood cannot be inflicted on you, which is pretty nice. You don't need the reservation efficiency. As you can see, I still have enough mana with all my stuff, and it's no problem. You'll just have to like lower the level of your Frostblink there. That is no problem. So yeah, that pretty much is going to be sorting out all of our attribute issues as well as our avoidance. And for the rest of the jewels, you basically just look for life and chaos resistance. You definitely want chaos resistance since we are using magic find gear. We are not able to get any resistance on our gear. So getting chaos resistance on this is going to be crucial. You know, you get 2 chaos resistance ones there. And alternatively, you can get charms that give you chaos resistance per endurance charge with explode. If you guys are like me, you probably don't really like crafting all of that much. And so I got good news for you guys. There's only one item that you actually need to craft on this build. The rest is actually full uniques, which is pretty good because, you know, that means that you just craft this one item and you're good to go. But the way you're going to want to do this is with loathing essences, and you're going to want to roll it until you have, you know, T1 resistance, which is very easy to do. And then you can swap that with harvest, of course, to fire resistance, so you get the bonuses to your other resistances. And then you're going to want to, you know, get T1 life, if possible, through Eldritch crafting. So that's like getting Searing Exarch influence as dominant, and then just rolling with Eldritch Chaos or Eldritch Exalts and that kind of stuff. The second prefix is just going to be a bonus. However, you do want a free prefix to craft the Corel's craft of 8% physical damage taken as fire. As previously mentioned, the Cloak of Flame is going to be essential for this build. You want to be getting a roll with 70% ignite duration plus, if possible, right? You don't want to be getting one with like a low duration roll, because we are actually wanting to get the duration of our ignite on our character to be as long as possible. This is because, you know, if the ignite drops off, we basically deal no damage, and we're going to have to deal damage with our Righteous Fire, which, as previously mentioned, basically just tickles the enemies. It deals like 100,000 damage. Doesn't deal much damage at all. We're not really scaling it at all. So yeah, getting the ignite duration is really nice. So we do get a little bit of extra ignite duration here and here. That's pretty good. Our gloves, Sadima's Touch, you want them to have a +2 of aura gems, and that's going to have 10% increased quantity of items found. For our Venter's Ring, of course, it doesn't really need to have resistances. However, we're getting, you know, a decent fire resistance roll. It's pretty nice. And our boots, you're just going to go for 20% increased quantity, and ideally you'd get movement speed on these, but I ended up getting regenerated life per second while moving, which is another pretty decent one. There's a few other corruptions you can look for, you know, it's not really a problem at all. Then I'm just going to put my aura gems in there as well as Frostblink. For your belt, you can use whatever belt here, not a big deal. I use Bisco's Leash because, you know, it's going to give me a little bit of extra quantity, as well as rarity and rampage. And rampage is pretty cool because it's going to give you some movement speed, as well as, you know, the swords that taunt, and it's going to make your build like look like fireworks essentially. And yeah, it's just really nice for magic find this setup. Flasks, it's going to be a gold flask with increased rarity of items found. You're going to want a ruby flask because you actually as well need to craft the suffix, at least one of them, that gives you 20% or it's 25% chance to you know, shock ignite during effect, as we're only able to get up to 75% increased chance to ignite on our tree. And as previously mentioned, you want to have a 100% global chance to ignite so that our explosions are actually going to ignite. So very important, do not miss that one. Taste of Hate shifts you know, a bunch of physical damage from take it to cold. So that's going to take us, you know, from 65% to you know, 80% physical damage taken to cold, or physical damage taken to elemental, sorry. So, you know, thanks to all our gear. And then this is going to be 80% total taken as. And then here we want a Quicksilver, and on the Quicksilver I crafted damage taken from hits leeches life during the effect, which is actually a really nice craft because, you know, while that's up and we're taking damage from hits, we're going to be permanently leeching. Since we're not actually ever capping our life, we're basically just going to be having overleech. So that's really nice to, you know, over sustain the damage that we're getting from you know, the 40% stagger from Petrified Blood, as well as helping out our Defiance of Destiny and our recoup a little bit to, you know, just keep us topped up at that 50% line at all times. But yeah, and then we'll just be, you know, capping that up further with our life flask if we ever get into you know, some scary situations. So just to quickly go over the clusters once again, your large cluster should be an elemental cluster or a fire damage cluster. You kind of just want to get anything on this. It's not a big deal. However, I like widespread destruction as it gives me a little bit more AoE, but corrosive elements is not actually doing anything as I'm not using a fire skill. So it's going to be 15% there. Ideally would have liked to have Prismatic Heart there. Swapping that between the two, you know, not a big deal. Definitely don't get the same one as me, you know, just grab whatever you can find. But keep in mind that the AoE is kind of nice. And then we have Towering Threat with Assert Dominance, but you don't necessarily need exactly these two modifiers. You can always check PoE or in Path of Building what other modifiers that you can get on your clusters. These might be expensive because I'm using them, but it's not what you have to use. And I really want to stress that, I might have certain things like my charms that have fire resistance and that kind of stuff, but there is other charms out there that are pretty damn good too, that, you can go on PoE and look at Earth Sign charms, see that there's a lot of really strong defensive options as well as offensive options that you can choose. Keep in mind that the prefix should always be 1% explode if possible, as it's going to make the build feel much smoother, but you're free to choose whatever suffix you want on there. But, you might control this and look, oh, it's like 20 divines today, you're crazy, I can't afford that. They were like 2 divines when I bought them. Sure, now I'm wearing them and they're expensive, but there's plenty of other options that are very cheap. And, you might be 10% less tanky, but, it's still an insane build and you're still able to do full juiced affliction maps. It's no problem at all. And it's honestly a lot of fun. And this build has sort of motivated me to super juice the mechanic. There's some crazy stuff that you can do. Just to put here back on screen what it looks like, and you're just going to be running through maps. This is going to be a Beyond map with Abyss, full juiced. I think it's about like 7,000 wisps in this map. It was pretty insane. I had some pretty crazy drops in this one. It's really cool. And you'll see, basically, I'll be walking around, picking up loot, and everything's exploding. When you see these big circles like that is the Hinokora's Death Fury. And as long as that's happening, I am going to be getting a massive explode, a massive ignite on my characters. You can see there that guy was extremely tanky and also double empowered. Yeah, just walking around and everything explodes around you, and you have Herald of Ash, so it's also visually kind of cool. And honestly, guys, I've been really loving this build. I've been able to juice the mechanic up a lot, and MF as well, because the mechanic is really synergizing well with MF. Honestly, I gotta say that this is a perfect build for this league if you are, looking for something to just blast the mechanic, make currency, and have fun with. It is very particular in the sense that, like, you're not going to be dealing any damage whatsoever if you're trying to do like conventional maps or stuff like that. Like, even sometimes, like, you get to the map boss and you don't have any damage whatsoever. That's probably when, you would either pop your Vile Breach and try to get an explosion onto him, or you would just basically portal out of the map because you don't deal any damage. But I can guarantee you that if you roll this map, if you roll this build, you're going to have a lot of fun, as I have. I am, generally kind of picky with my builds, but this build has just been so much fun for me to play. And yeah, I think you guys will have fun too. All right, and so just to close off this video, I know that there is actually a lot of build ownership Andes out there that might say like, yo, Tuna, you just copied this build. It was a thing last league. Yep, and I gotta say, that is pretty true. There is people that have done the Hinokora's Death Fury build. As you can see from a video that I posted 1 year ago, I basically have, I don't want to say invented this, because actually it was thanks to Wolfio that, actually introduced me to that concept. But this was in Arch Nemesis League that I was playing the Elementalist, and it was basically the exact same concept. However, instead of Hinokora's Death Fury, I was exploding with Fist Chest. Yeah, I'm just basically going around auto-bombing with the staff and doing the same kind of thing. So yeah, just essentially just to show you guys that I'm not just a copycat. I'm also, just very proud to have, played this build in the past and also just present it to you guys. I don't even know why I'm saying this. It's just, how Path of Exile is. People are gonna be like, but Tuna, you're just a fraud, which is partly true. But at least I can say that this is one of those things where I'm not a fraud. Okay, all right. Thank you everyone for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope it has explained a little bit about how the mechanics work, the things that make the build tick, as well as what you need to pop off with this build. And of course, PoB is going to be in the description. I hope I'm going to be also publishing my Atlas strategy in the future, so that you guys can have more of a good idea of what you can play with this build. However, until then, you can always catch me on my stream, twitch.tv/crouching_tuna, or I'll be uploading videos here whenever possible. So yeah, I'll see you guys around. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you have a good day. I appreciate you. Bye bye.